Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to give you a warm welcome on behalf of the Vienna 250 VA Committee and the Vienna branch of AAUW. Welcome to Liberty's Daughters, where you will hear from 7 women who lived during the American Revolution. Now, most of these stories probably will be unfamiliar to you, but we think you will leave here engaged, intrigued, and wanting to learn more about the people who lived during that time period. And you may be surprised to learn just how active women were in the war for independence. Just please take a moment now to silence your cell phones and any other noise-making devices. And I appreciate your coming this evening.
Welcome to my shop, my life's work, or what is left of it. 'Tis but a shadow of what it once was. I've sold off nearly everything. The ribbons, the garnet rings, the Didsbury shoes that gentleman so favored. All gone, or near to it. I have but few articles remaining before I take leave of this place. For almost 10 years have I lived and worked as an unmarried woman answering to no man. I set up my first shop in Fredericksburg with a large assortment of European goods and advertised myself as milliner lately arrived from London. The ladies and gentlemen of Virginia have always appreciated quality and fashion, and I have provided both in abundance. I had the freedom to procure such wonderful items to sell until now. What good is the finest merchandise in all Virginia when one cannot import more? The Continental Congress, you understand, has forbidden all trade with Britain. Indeed, 'twas not long ago I traveled to London myself and chose every item with mine own hands because I wanted the newest and the best. The most carefully selected. I had written many a letter to Mr. Norton in Queen's Square, giving him particular instructions. However, nothing serves so well as choosing one's own stock. I sell not only millinery goods, but lottery and play tickets, jewelry, riding and walking sticks, silver soup ladles, and medicine, and occasionally lodgings for gentlemen. In October of 1771, I came here to Williamsburg from Fredericksburg. During the sitting of the Assembly in April and October, I did my best business, for that was when the courts were in session. The burgesses, the planters from the large estates, they came all to the capital with their wives and their daughters with them, eager to see the latest fashions from across the sea. I stocked satins and sarcenets, blonde lace and mignonette lace, ladies' hats and bonnets. For the gentlemen, the finest shoes and pumps, buckled low on the foot just as they desired. I could not be content to remain in one place if another might prove more profitable. So I removed to Petersburg for a time, and once even established myself in Annapolis, in Maryland. But I always returned to Williamsburg, to this very shop across from the Capitol, where Mr. Ayscough lately lived. Here I prospered. For, mind you, I never sold my goods for credit. It was always ready money only. Yet, for all my dedication to my business, all my considered choices, none of it signifies now. When the trouble with Parliament began, I confess I paid it little mind. I am a merchant, not a politician. But the men have made their quarrels into my ruin. First came the non-importation agreements. I weathered that storm, for it did not last. But now they have formed this continental association, and they have forbidden all importation from Britain, not merely tea, everything. How is a milliner to survive when she cannot import the very goods which are her stock in trade? All my wares come from England, yet the Continental Congress would have the ladies wear nothing but homespun fashion. No silks, no satins, only homemade fabrics. The men praise these women who spin their own thread, calling them virtuous. But what of me? For those of us who have built their livelihoods on trade with Britain, we must now choose, declare oneself for the Congress or for the Crown. I do not wish to choose. I only wish to conduct my business in peace, to earn an honest living through my own industry and skill. If I remain in Virginia, I shall have no goods to sell. My reputation, built so carefully over these 10 years, will crumble to nothing. They suggest I might sell American-made goods. Homespun. Oh, or they counsel patience. Wait, they say, this quarrel shall soon be resolved. But I do not believe it, for blood has been shed at Lexington and Concord, and blood demands more blood. Therefore, I have placed an advertisement in the Virginia Gazette announcing that I am selling all my remaining stock and returning to England. I shall stay there until liberty of importation is allowed, for I cannot remain here without the means to conduct my business. I know what they will say of me. There goes a loyalist, they will hiss. But that is not the truth of it. I do not go to England because I love King George. I go because I am a businesswoman, and without goods to sell, I cannot conduct my business. They speak of liberty, but what liberty do I possess? As an unmarried woman, I depend entirely upon my own efforts for my survival. I have no husband whose income might sustain me. I have only my shop, my goods, and my reputation. And now, the very men who speak so eloquently of liberty have destroyed my means of earning a livelihood and have robbed me of my liberty. These are men's quarrels, decided in men's meetings, affecting women's lives without women's consent. I do not deny that the colonists have grievances, but must the resolution of these disputes destroy every British merchant in America? If this conflict becomes a true rebellion, what shall become of those perceived to have supported the crown? Civil conflicts breed terrible hatreds, property confiscated, persons banished or worse. I have no desire to see my shop ransacked by a mob. Perhaps it is cowardly for me to leave, perhaps, but I am 38 years old, and I have built this business through my own efforts, without assistance from family or husband. Every item in this shop, with my own careful judgment, was purchased. Every debt I paid punctually. Mr. Norton can attest to that. Judge me as you will. Surely history will judge me as it will. But I have made my choice, the only choice I felt I could make. I am returning to England, not out of political conviction, but out of economic necessity. If that makes me a loyalist in the eyes of Congress, then so be it. In my own eyes, I am simply a businesswoman caught between contending forces, neither of which shows regard for the livelihood of an unmarried woman trying to make her way in this world. I have kept careful accounts always. Every invoice, every payment recorded in this ledger. I shall take it with me, for it is proof of what I have accomplished here. Whatever others may say of Catherine Rathel, they cannot deny that she was an industrious and successful merchant. Virginia, and Williamsburg especially, has been my home. I shall miss the bustle of public times when the city fills with visitors and my shop is thronged with customers. I shall miss being my own mistress, answerable to no one save myself and my conscience. But I cannot remain. And so I go, back to England, back to London, until liberty of importation is allowed, and I may return. God grant that day comes soon.
Coda, Catherine Rathel sailed for England in 1776, but she never reached its shores. Her ship was caught in a hurricane within sight of Liverpool and sank with all hands.
You ask me, Mildred, what it has been like to live through this war. You ask as though I might set it down neatly, as though it were a tale one might tell at supper and then fold away into a drawer. But I have lived it, and I cannot fold it. It has creased itself into every part of me, and I fear it shall never quite lay flat again. I was 10 years old when the war began. 10. Do you remember what it was to be 10, Mildred? I remember. I remember this house in Yorktown, our house, the one my father built when the family was still prosperous, still whole. My grandfather and my father's brothers were merchants of some standing, though by the time I was old enough to know them properly, most had already gone to their graves. But the house remained. The warehouses remained. The tobacco stores, the plantations, all of it remained, and we believed it would remain forever. My father knew before the rest of us did that forever was not promised. He was deep in Virginia politics, deep enough to see what was coming, deep enough to feel the tremors in the ground, to sense the ground shifting beneath our feet. The rest of the country even knew to look down. And so he made his decision. We would leave Yorktown. We would not wait for the British to come to us. And leave we did. You cannot imagine, Mildred, or perhaps you can, for you have lived some portion of it yourself, what it is to be a refugee in your own country. That is the word, is it not? Refugee. I did not know the weight of it when I was young, but I know now. We were among the war's earliest, and we were not the last. But in every direction that we traveled, and heaven knows we left but little of Virginia unexplored, we heard naught but the din of war. Our late peaceful country had become a scene of terror and confusion. We moved again, and again, and again. I lost count of the houses we slept in, the rooms that were not our own, the strangers upon whose charity we depended. My father was called away to serve, first upon the state's naval board, then upon the Council of State. He was away most of the time, away in Williamsburg, away wherever duty took him. And we, my mother, my sisters, and I, were left to manage as best we could. It was not a life I had been prepared for. There were no academies for young women in Virginia, not then, not in any proper sense. My father educated me at home. He put books in my hands and told me to read widely, and I did. I read novels. I read letters. I read anything I could lay my eyes upon, and I wrote. I wrote to you, Mildred. I wrote because the words needed somewhere to go. And because writing was the only power I possessed in a world that had taken every other power from me. But it was not merely for amusement that I wrote. I wrote because I was seeing things, living things that no one else seemed to be recording. The histories that they will write of this war, Mildred, they will be full of generals and governors, battles and treaties. They will tell you what happened at Saratoga, what happened at Trenton. They will not tell you what it was to be a girl of 12, sitting in a borrowed parlor, listening to your mother weep quietly behind a closed door, because she does not wish you to know her fear. They will not tell you what it was to watch your family, your proud, prosperous family, shrink. We were forced to smaller quarters, from a mansion to a small frame house here in Richmond, a small frame house. My father, who had built a life of some consequence, now occupied 4 walls and a roof that the wind rattled like a drum. And then, then came the night that shall live in my memory until the day God calls me home. January, the 5th of January. This very year, Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, an American, mind you, one of our own, a man who had fought beside Washington himself, who had bled for his cause, turned traitor, turned coat, turned his sword against the very country he had sworn to defend. And he came to Richmond. He came with 1,600 men. And he came so swiftly that Governor Jefferson could scarcely muster a defense before Arnold was already upon us. Do you know what it is to hear the alarm raised in the night? To hear shouting in the streets, and to know with a certainty that settles in your bones, that the enemy is not some distant abstraction on the map, but is here, marching down your very street. We fled. We fled in chaos and confusion. My mother gathered what she could. My sisters clung to one another, and I ran. We all ran. Arnold's men burned Richmond. They burned the warehouses, the foundries, the public buildings. They loaded 42 ships with stolen goods, our tobacco, our stores, everything we had worked and bled to produce. Terrible things were done in those hours. Churches were plundered. Homes were set to torch. And Governor Jefferson, our own governor, had already fled to Charlottesville before Arnold had even entered the town. I do not say this to condemn Jefferson. I say it because I want you to understand what this war has truly been. It has not been the war of pamphlets and speeches. It has not been the war of brave men marching in lines toward glory. It has been this fear. Our flight and Jefferson's flight, this running and hiding and praying that the footsteps that you hear in the night belong to a friend, not an enemy. The war, though it was to involve my immediate family in poverty and perplexity of every kind, was the foundation of independence and prosperity for my country. And what sacrifice would not an American, a Virginian, at the earliest age have made for so desirable an end? I was 10 when it began. I shall be 16 before it ends, if it ends. I have grown up with this war the way other girls grow up with lessons and dances and courtship. It has been my education. It has taught me things no book could teach. Necessity taught us to use exertions, which our girls of the present day and calmer times and safer lands know nothing of. Women have had to step outside every role that was ever set for us. We have managed. We have endured. We have held households together while the men were gone, and we have done it without complaint, because complaint would have served no purpose. I shall finish this letter to you tonight, Mildred. I shall set down what I can, as faithfully as I can. Not because I am important, not because my story is greater than any other, but because someone must write it down. Someone must remember what it was to be a woman, a girl even, living through the birth of a nation, not from the battlefield, not from the council chamber, but from the small frame house, from the borrowed room, from the flickering candlelight where a girl puts pen to paper and tries to make sense of a world that has been turned entirely upside down. We shall see what becomes of this country, you and I. We shall see whether all of this running, this burning, all of this grief was worth the price.
You want to know how I came to be here on this shore in this heat, and it's with this ache in my bones that the doctor says will never leave? Sit, and I will tell you. But you must understand that this is not a story but a tale. It is a tale of many. It is a story of a woman broken into pieces by the world and then, God be praised, put back together again, one shore at a time. I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, if you must know the place. I was born into bondage as my mother was and her mother was before her. I do not even remember a time when I did not belong to another. That is the first thing the world teaches a black woman. In the colonies, you are not yours, you are theirs. I belonged to a man called Willoughby, a loyalist. Even as the patriots rose up against the crown, even as the world itself flew apart over liberty and the rights of man, oh, how they spoke of liberty. I was property. I was listed. I was a thing to be inherited, like a horse or a piece of silverware or a linen shirt. Do you see the cruelty in that? The very men who declared that all men are created equal kept us in chains. They wrote their grand words on parchment like ink made fine, and beneath those words, they wrote our names in the ledger as livestock. Virginia burned with the fire of revolution, and still we burn too. Our fire was older, and no one came to put it out. But the Lord works in his own way and in his own time, ways we cannot fathom. When Lord Dunmore issued his proclamation that the enslaved who fled to the British lines would be freed, thousands ran. Thousands. We stole away. We ran through the dark and the smoke and the gunfire, and we ran towards the enemy because the enemy had offered us something that no one else had ever done. Something the patriots had never offered us. They offered us freedom, not the word, the thing itself. Now, Dunmore's proclamation did not apply to me, not directly. For Willoughby was himself a loyalist, but the war came to my doorstep nonetheless. British troops ravaged the shores of Norfolk in the winter of 75 and 76. And on New Year's Day, they opened fire upon the city. The ground shook, and in all that chaos, not one word, not the thing itself. But I found Caesar. Caesar Perth. He was a tradesman. He had been enslaved not far from me, owned by a man called Waller, a neighbor actually of my own master. It's probably that we had known one another before, but it was in those camps among the British lines that we became one. He was a good man. He was a strong man, a man who could build things with his hands and who looked at me as though I were not property, but a person. Do you know what that's worth? To be seen as a person? We escaped. We fled to the British, and there behind those lines, we were given something that we had never had in our life, a document, a certificate. my name upon it in ink signed by General Samuel Birch. Freedom. Legal, recorded, witnessed freedom for the first time, the very first time. I was no longer a thing to be owned. I wept when they handed it to me, and I'm not ashamed to say so. But freedom, I learned, is not a destination, it is a road. And the road led us north. So on the 31st of July, 1783, my family, Caesar, our daughters, and I, boarded a ship called the L'Abondance, and we sailed for Nova Scotia. I was carrying our youngest Susan, or near enough of it, the records disagree, but as they often do when they bother to record us at all, we believed we were sailing towards promised land. The British had made their promises: land, equality, a fresh start. Nova Scotia was cold. Oh, it was cold in a way I had never known. The winters bit through every layer of cloth I owned. We settled in a place called Birchtown, named for the very general who had signed our certificates of freedom. How neat the British liked things. How tidy. But the truth was not tidy. The truth was that we were given land that was rocky, barren, swampy, the worst of what Nova Scotia had to offer. The white loyalists were accommodated first, always first. We waited for the land grants that we were promised, and they did not come. Or if they came too late. So broken, so begrudgingly, as if the promise they had made us had been a lie from the beginning. And perhaps it was. The white settlers, some of them, looked at us as though we had no right to breathe the same air. And in Shelburne, in the summer of '84, white soldiers rioted against us, against free black people. They beat us, they burned our homes, they punished us for crimes that a white man would not have looked at twice. We were free. Yes, the paper said so. But freedom on paper and freedom in the flesh are not always the same. Still, we held on to our faith. The Methodist Church was our refuge. We met every night to worship freely, openly, no longer hiding from slave owners in the dark. That was something. That was real, and we held on to one another. A community bound together not by chains, but by shared suffering, shared hope, shared prayer. And then came John Clarkson, a representative of the Sierra Leone Company. He came to Birchtown with promises. Seems like promises followed us like shadows. But these promises were different. Land, self-governance, equality, a colony in West Africa on the very coast from which our ancestors had been torn. Nearly 1,200 of us said yes. Nearly the entire community of Birchtown. We said yes because we had no choice left that was not a choice born of despair. And in January of '79, we boarded the ships. We crossed the Atlantic, and in March, we arrived at Freetown. Caesar died. A monsoon tore through the settlement on the 2nd and 3rd of April. A storm so vicious it shattered everything we had just begun to build. Caesar was taken by it. Hundreds of us, too. The very first season, the very first breath of a new life, and God took my husband from me. I will not pretend that I did not fall apart. I fell apart in the mud and the rain and the wreckage, and I screamed at heaven, and heaven did not answer. Not then, not in words I could hear. But I rose, because what else was there? My daughters needed me, and so I rose and I built. I opened a boarding house, a chop house. I fed soldiers, sailors, and company men. I sold goods. I rented rooms. I became, and I say it not with pride, but with defiance, a businesswoman. One of the first 6 people in this colony to be granted a trading license. One of only 3 women. They gave me that license and I used it and no one took it from me. And yet this was not paradise. The company reneged on its promise of self-governance. The indigenous people, the Timne, regarded us with suspicion, and we them. The seasons were brutal. In '94, the French came, 5 warships, then bombarded Freetown, and they looted, and they set fire on every building in the settlement. I fled with my students, the African children that I had been teaching, out to the edge of town where we met their chief, Timne chief called Pabimbe. He sheltered us. He sheltered the Nova Scotian school mistress and her children. Whatever I'd done to earn his respect before that day, I thank God for that. And then after the French left, the governor, Zachary Macaulay, a good man, a devout man, he saw what I had done. He offered me a place in his household. I became his housekeeper. I taught the 24 African children who lived under his roof. And when he sailed to England in '99, he asked for me to come to care for those children at a school in Kaplan, London. So I went. I crossed the ocean again. And in England, my little Susan, who had traveled with me from Nova Scotia to Sierra Leone to London, my Susan died. I have crossed 3 oceans. I have lived on 3 continents. I have been enslaved, freed, promised land, denied land, righted against, sheltered by strangers, and widowed in a storm. I had been a bondswoman, a refugee, a settler, a businesswoman, a teacher, and a servant. By choice, not by force, in the end. I have been recorded in ledgers as property, and I have signed my own name beside a trading license. I am a woman who has been broken by this world and put back together again so many times that the cracks are a part of me now. But I will tell you this, I will not stop believing. Not in the British, not in the Americans, not in any government or any company or any man who promises me anything on parchment. I believe in God. I believe that we, Black people, scattered across the earth like seas in a storm, are still growing, still reaching, still alive. And that, child, is how Mary Perth came to be on this shore.
Oh, you wish to know my story? It's not a tale I am accustomed to telling. For nearly 30 years, I have kept my own counsel about what happened during the war. But now it seems my service is to be made public. Governor Cabell writes to the General Assembly on my behalf. He says, "We are worn out in the public service, without property or money." 'Tis all true, though it sits ill with me to be thought an object of charity. Very well. If my story is to be told, let me tell it properly, in my own words. Sit down and I shall tell you how Anna Maria Lane came to be numbered among Virginia's Revolutionary soldiers, the only woman from this Commonwealth so recognized, they tell me. I was born in New England, New Hampshire most likely, in the 1750s. I married John Lane, and by 1776, we were settled in Connecticut. When John joined the Continental Army under General Israel Putnam, I followed him as many women did. We called them camp followers, wives and widows who accompanied the army to cook, to wash, to nurse the wounded. But I did not remain a camp follower for long. Perhaps it was necessity. Perhaps it was desperation. The fear that if I did not disguise myself and fight alongside my husband, I should lose him entire. Or perhaps, there was something in me that rebelled against the confinement of women's duties, something that wished to prove I could do what men did, and do it just as well. Whatever the reason, I donned men's clothing. I bound my chest, cut my hair short, to all outward appearances, became a young man enlisted in the Continental Army. 'Twas not as difficult as you might suppose. We slept in our uniforms, marched for days without washing. No one was looking at anyone else. There were no physical examinations. A soldier needed only front teeth, an operating thumb, and a forefinger to load a musket. I possessed all of these, and I could march as far as any man. Reach in, grab the cartridge, tear off the paper with your teeth, pour the powder, ram the ball, prime the pan, cock, aim, fire. In battle, there is no time for hesitation. You load, you fire again and again until the order comes to cease. John and I fought together through New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. We were at Trenton on Christmas night when General Washington led us across the Delaware in that desperate gamble that saved the Revolution. I fought as a common soldier, loading, firing, advancing, retreating, following orders like any other man. Did John know? How could he not? Perhaps he thought it safer for me to fight at his side than to remain with the camp followers. Or perhaps he saw that I had a soldier's heart and did not wish to deny me. And then came Germantown, October of 1777. The British held Philadelphia, and General Washington was determined to retake it, 4 columns attacking simultaneously in the early morning fog. The attack began before dawn. We advanced through fog so dense we could scarce see 10 yards ahead. Musket fire, cannon fire, the screams of wounded men, officers shouting orders, half lost in the chaos. We pushed forward, driving the British back. For a time, it seemed we might succeed. And then, I was hit. A musket ball struck me just above the knee. The pain, like a white-hot iron pressed into my flesh, I fell, clutching my leg, watching the blood seep between my fingers. John was nearby. I know not how close, for the fog and smoke were so thick. But I heard his voice calling my name. Not my real name, but the man's name I had taken. And then I faced a choice. I could cry out for a surgeon and reveal my sex, or I could bind the wound myself and continue on. I chose the latter. I tore a strip from my shirt, wound it tight around my leg. I could not stand. The leg would not bear weight. But I could crawl. And I could still load and fire. So I propped myself against a wall and fired at the enemy until the order came to retreat. We did not take Philadelphia that day. The attack failed. Miscommunication. The fog that concealed us also confused us. I limped away, supported by John, my legs screaming with every step. He examined my wound. The ball had shattered bone, torn muscle. We both knew I would never walk properly again. For 30 years, I have been lame. I refused to see a surgeon. I told John I would rather die than be discovered. Just before Germantown, General Washington had forbidden women from accompanying the army to the battlefield. Had they learned what I was, I suspected the consequence would be nothing pleasant. But I did not die, and I did not stop serving. When John re-enlisted with the Virginia Light Dragoons, I went with him. I was with him when he was wounded at the Siege of Savannah in 1779. We served together until the fighting ended in 1781. After the war, we settled in Virginia. For a time, I worked as a nurse at the military hospital here in Richmond, tending soldiers, bathing their wounds. And all the while, I knew, as no one else did, that I had once been one of them. I had bled for my country. But by 1804, I could no longer work. We petitioned the state for pensions. Governor Cabell wrote to the General Assembly, "Anna Maria Lane is also very infirm, having been disabled by a severe wound which she received while fighting as a common soldier in one of our revolutionary battles, from which she has never recovered." 'Tis true, but I do not regret, not for one moment. They tell me the General Assembly will grant us pensions. John will receive 40 pounds a year, the standard pension. But I am to receive 100 pounds, more than twice what men receive. They cite my extraordinary military services at the Battle of Germantown, performed in the garb and with the courage of a soldier. I was not the only woman who served thus. Margaret Corbin took her husband's place at a cannon at Fort Washington. Deborah Sampson served years disguised as a man. Molly Pitcher took over her husband's cannon at Monmouth. Countless others fought and bled without recognition. We are told war is men's business, but some of us felt called to serve in a different way. Are women's lives less valuable? Is our courage less genuine? I think not. The pension the General Assembly grants me is not merely charity, it is recognition, acknowledgement that what I did mattered, that my sacrifice was real. For 30 years, I have lived with this wound, and now, finally, my country tells me it was not in vain. I am Anna Maria Lane. I am a wife, a mother, a nurse. And I am a soldier of the American Revolution, the only woman from Virginia officially recognized as such. I bore arms for my country. I was wounded in defense of our liberty. And though I shall never walk again without pain, I would do it all again, without hesitation, for the sake of the freedom we now enjoy. May God bless these United States of America, and may He grant that the sacrifices we made, all of us, men and women alike, shall not be forgotten.
Another coda. Next time you're in Richmond, take a moment in Richmond's Capitol Square and look for the historical marker that was erected in 1997 in honor of Anna Maria Lane.
Thank you.
You wish to know what I remember. Well, everyone wishes to know what I remember. They come with their quills and their fine paper, and they sit in my chair. Yes, they sit in my chair. But I do not complain, for I have learned long ago that complaint changes nothing. And they ask me, what was it like? What did you see? What did I see? Friend, I saw the world. I saw it from the lowest place a woman can stand. And I saw it from the kitchen of the most powerful man in the colonies. I saw it through smoke. I saw it through steam and the blood of men I could not name. And I am still here, 102 years, and still here. Make of that what you will. They gave me a name that was not my own. Hannah. Now, my mother was an enslaved woman. My father, he was Oneida, a man of the forest. And he lived near Smyrna in Kent County, Delaware. Now, he called me Long Point. And that's a name that he chose for himself for a place where he met a buck and he overpowered it. And that's how it was done by his people. And so I was Long Point. That was my name until I was sold. I was 15 when my master, John Brinkley, put me on the block in Pennsylvania. 15. I did not know the weight of that number at that time, but I know it now. I have carried it like a stone in my chest for 87 years since. I was sold again at 25 to Parson Henderson, who took me across the sea to Northumberland in England. England. Can you imagine that? A girl of mixed blood, Oneida and African, standing on English soil. It was there. It was there for the first time that someone paid me for my labor. Small wages, but they were mine. And I learned something in England that no one had ever told me before. No one had bothered to teach me that my hands had value and that I had value. But of course we know that value in itself does not stop the selling. 10 years later, at 35, I was purchased again by Reverend John Mason of the Associate Reformed Church in New York. And with him, I stayed and I learned to cook in earnest. And I learned to sell my own pastries and breads. I saved what I could, every penny, every farthing. I saved it the way a drowning man or a drowning woman clutches at driftwood. And then I met Isaac. Isaac Till, a whip maker from New York. Oh, Isaac was a good man. He was a quiet man, a man who knew, as I did, what it meant to belong to someone else. We married, we moved to Philadelphia, and we had children. Andrew, John, and Sarah. We built what we could, a life made of small, carefree pieces, like a quilt sewn from scraps. And then the war came. the revolution. Everyone speaks of it now as if it was a grand thing, and perhaps it was. But I will tell you where it looked like from where I stood. It looked like smoke. It looked like mud. It looked like men dying in the cold while I stirred a pot that had nothing in it except water and a prayer. Isaac enlisted, and I volunteered. I was hired into the staff of General George Washington himself to serve as a cook. We, Isaac and I, appeared together in the General's expense book of 1776, 2 names among many, 2 lives swallowed up by the machinery of war. But you must understand, the General kept his cook close. And this was no small trust, because in those days, it was common that poisoning was a common method of assassination. A trusted cook was as valuable as a trusted sword. And so I cooked for him. I cooked through the marches and the retreats. I cooked through the battles, Brandywine, Germantown, all of them. I was there. Between me and the General, and between him and Lafayette, we were present at every battle they fought in that war, every one. But none of it, none, was so terrible as that winter. Valley Forge, December of 1777. We marched into that place, 12,000 men, most of them barefoot, half of them naked to the cold. The British held Philadelphia not 20 miles away, and they feasted while we starved. The soldiers ate dried meat when there was any. They also ate corn, salted fish, and when that ran out, and it did run out, there was nothing. Nothing but the cold, nothing but the silence and the sound of men coughing in the night. I lived and worked in the Isaac Potts house, which was the General's headquarters. And there, in the January of 1778, in the midst of all that suffering, I gave birth to my son, Isaac Worley Till, while 2,000 men were dying all around us of typhus, smallpox, and exposure, born into a war that had not yet been won. I held Isaac close. I kept him warm with my own body. And I thought, this child is born free, or he will be. I swear it. And I made it so. On the 13th of October, that same year, I reached the sum I needed. I bought my freedom. Every penny I had saved, every wage that I had earned, and it was enough. The arrangement had been made between my enslavers, between me and the general, that I could earn my way to liberty, and I did. I earned it with my hands. I earned it with my sweat. 6.5 years of cooking in the fires of the revolution. I did something else. I took the name Archer. It was mine to take. And from that day forward, I was paid directly for my work. I stayed on with the general, not because I had to. It's because I chose to. I cooked his pastries, I kept his kitchen, and for half a year I also served under General Lafayette, the Marquis himself, a Frenchman, a gentleman truly, tall, slender, with his fair face and his reddish hair. He spoke English well enough, and there's one thing I'll never forget about him. He was always kind. He even called me Aunt Hannah. And when I came back this year, 1824, imagine the Marquis de Lafayette calling me Aunt Hannah. He sat in this very room. Well, not in this chair, and because that one was mine. And he asked me where I had been when the general left Morristown. And I told him, I remained more than 6 months with you, sir, in the same house. And he remembered. He remembered me. Something else I will never forget. When he learned that I was behind on my ground rents, that I might lose this house, this small, foolish, precious house, he paid it off. All of it, without even asking me about that. He simply sent the money, and it was done. I have cooked for a general. I have birthed a child in the belly of an army. I have walked through battles, through winters that would have killed a younger woman. I have been sold 3 times. And I have bought myself back once. And that once was enough. they will not write my name in the history books. I know this. I'm not a general. I'm not a congressman. I am a cook, a black woman, an old woman in a small house on South Farm Street. But I was there. Friends, I was there when this nation was forged. In the fire, in the cold, and in the hunger. I stirred the pot. I kept the flame. And if the general could not have done without his sword, then perhaps he could not have done without his cook either. $102 years. And I remember it all.
Hannah died in 1826 at the age of 104. In 215, the Daughters of the American Revolution erected a marker at her gravesite noting Hannah's contributions, and a DAR chapter was also named in her honor. Lady Washington.
"'Tis a peculiar fate, is it not, to be celebrated whilst one heart lies heavy with care? They call me Lady Washington now, a title I neither sought nor desired, but one I must bear as best I can. Before this dreadful conflict, I was but Mistress of Mount Vernon, content in my domestic sphere. Now I find myself here, in this desolate place they call Valley Forge, whilst my beloved husband commands an army that scarce has shoes upon its feet. I remember well the day the general departed for Cambridge in the summer of '75. I stood upon the piazza at Mount Vernon, watching him ride away in the blue and buff uniform, and I knew with a certainty that pierced my very soul that our lives would never more be the same. Yet he accepted the burden as duty required, and I resolved that I should not fail him in his hour of greatest need. They speak of me now in the gazettes as though I am some manner of heroine, but I am no soldier, no patriot orator. I am a woman of Virginia, widowed once before at 26, who knows the sting of loss too well. My dear Daniel left me with 2 small children and an estate of 17,000 acres. I learned then what it meant to be strong when all seemed lost, to manage accounts, to direct overseers. Providence was preparing me, it seems, for trials yet more severe. Each winter, when the armies retire to their quarters, the general sends for me. Martha, his letters say, I have need of you. And so I go through countryside made dangerous from war, from Mount Vernon to Cambridge. I journeyed in '75, and what a revelation! I had never ventured beyond Virginia before, yet there I was, celebrated at every stop. 'Twas most overwhelming for one accustomed to the quiet rhythms of plantation life. But I went not for accolades. I went because my husband required me, and because I beheld in his eyes the weight of command, the terrible burden of sending men to their deaths for a cause that might yet fail. At Cambridge, I entertained the officers' wives and endeavored to make his headquarters a home, however temporary. And here at Valley Forge, oh, what trials we have endured this winter. The soldiers, those brave, suffering souls, arrived in December with scarce a coat amongst them, their feet wrapped in rags, leaving trails of blood upon the snow. The general paces at night, racked with anguish at their condition, yet still these men remain, building their rude huts, enduring. Disease and dysentery run rampant, and I fear we will lose more men to sickness than ever fell in battle. I organized the officers' wives to mend clothing and to nurse the sick. Mrs. Knox is here, such a dear woman, scarce 22. We worked together with the other officers' wives, sewing shirts and stockings for the soldiers. It's humble work, yet I never have felt more purposeful. Each stitch, each mended garment might keep a man from perishing in this cruel winter. There are days when the despair seems overwhelming. The general faces threats to his command from certain factions in Congress who whisper of a Conway cabal. I see how it weighs on him, yet he perseveres with that steady determination that has ever been his hallmark. Yet there is hope, too. Baron von Steuben has arrived, a Prussian officer who drills the men with a discipline they have never known before. And the news from France, an alliance. France will recognize our independence and provide us with aid. When word reached us in May, 'twas as though the very heavens had opened. For the first time in many months, I saw genuine joy upon my husband's face. But there is cost to this great endeavor that few comprehend. My son Jack, my surviving child, remains in Abington with his wife and his 4 babes. He is my last living child. My sweet Patsy died 5 years past, seized by one of her terrible fits, and I thought my heart would break entire. And now this war keeps me from Jack and his family for many months at a time. Yet what choice do I have? When I consider what is at stake, our liberty, our very right to govern ourselves, how can I place my personal comfort above such considerations? This past summer, Mrs. Esther Reed of Philadelphia published a broadside calling upon the women of America to raise funds for our soldiers and wrote to me asking that I would serve as a recipient of these donations. Women throughout the colonies have contributed what they can. From my own funds, I have donated $20,000, 6,000 pounds sterling. This is money I can ill afford to lose, yet how can I hesitate when our soldiers lack the most basic necessities? With these funds, we have purchased shirts and stockings. The men call it the offering of the ladies, and I am moved by their gratitude. Yet, I am under no illusions about my safety. Early in the war, the general warned me that Lord Dunmore, Virginia's royal governor, might attempt to have me kidnapped and held hostage against my husband's surrender. For a time, I dare not remain at Mount Vernon, and even now I travel with armed escort. It is a strange and fearful thing to be considered a prize of war. And there are whispers, cruel, baseless whispers, that I am a loyalist at heart. Nothing could be further from the truth. I believe as fervently as my husband does in the righteousness of our cause. We seek to preserve our ancient liberties as Englishmen, liberties that the crown trampled upon. For these principles, I will endure any hardship, face any danger. Sometimes in the darkness of night, I wonder what will become of us all. Will this great experiment succeed? Or will we be crushed by the might of Britain, branded as traitors, our lives forfeit? The general and I have spoken of this. We know full well that if we fail, we will hang as rebels. Yet we are resolved, better to perish in the attempt to secure our liberty than to live in subjugation. When this war has ended, and pray God it shall end in our favor, I long for nothing more than to return to Mount Vernon, to sit upon the piazza in the cool of the evening and watch the Potomac flow past. I was not born to be a public figure, yet circumstances have thrust me into this role, and I shall fulfill it to the utmost of my ability. The spring comes soon, and already the days grow longer, and there are signs of renewal even in this desolate place. The British hold Philadelphia still, but they shall not hold it forever. And I will return to Mount Vernon for a time. But when next winter comes and the general sends for me, I shall go to him again. However many winters this war shall last, I shall be at his side. 'Tis not from any desire, fame, or recognition, but for love. Love for my husband. Love for my country. And love for the great cause of human liberty, which we all have sacrificed so much. Let history judge whether I have done my duty. If in some future age they remember Martha Washington at all, I hope they will say that she loved her country, that she served according to her station, and that she never faltered in the darkest hours of the Revolution. May Providence watch over all of us, and may we prove worthy of the freedom we seek to establish.
Martha Washington's beloved son, Jack, died November 5th, 1781, of camp fever in Yorktown.
You must think me mad. A girl of 16, alone in the dark, canoeing across a river she has known all her life, but never crossed in the dark. And then riding 10 miles through swamp and shadow on a borrowed horse to find a French general she has never met. Yes, you must think me mad. Perhaps I am. But sit and let me tell you what happened, for I hardly believe it myself. I have lived all my life here at City Point, all 16 years of it, which I grant you is not so very long. My father is Alexander Bowling, and this plantation has been in our family for generations. We are not a great family, but not as some in Virginia are great. But we are respectable, and we are patriots. My brothers, I have 2, William and Stith, both went to fight when the war began. I have not seen Stith in over 5 years. 5 years. He was barely more than a boy himself when he left, and I pray every night that he still draws breath somewhere, fighting for this country we love. When my brothers departed, it fell to my mother and me to manage the plantation. To do so is truly hard work,
harder than most people suppose. The spinning bees, the mending, the accounts, the endless labor of keeping a household in wartime when half the goods one needs cannot be had for love or money. I grew accustomed to it. I grew accustomed to the fear, the constant, quiet fear that comes from living in a land at war. We have heard the cannons at Petersburg. We have seen the smoke rising from the burning of tobacco stores. We have watched soldiers pass along the road, sometimes Continentals, sometimes militia, sometimes the redcoats themselves. But nothing prepared me for what happened last night. They came in the late afternoon. Lord Cornwallis himself and his officers with the whole of the British Southern Army at his back. They came without warning, without ceremony. They simply arrived as though the plantation was theirs by right, which I suppose in their eyes it was. Cornwallis demanded shelter for the night. What could we do? Refuse him? With 7,000 men at his command? My mother received them with what grace she could muster, and we gave them what we had: food, wine, a place to sleep. The officers took our best rooms. Cornwallis himself dined at our table. They ate our food and drank our wine and spoke of their plans as though we were not there, as though we were furniture, as though a Virginia girl serving at table could not hear every word they said. And that is how I learned what I learned. I was clearing the dishes, quietly, as one does when soldiers are about, and the general was speaking to his officers of the next morning's business. He spoke freely, carelessly. He had no fear of us. Why should he? We were women and servants, nothing more in his reckoning. But I heard him. I heard him say that Lafayette, the young Frenchman, Washington's own man in Virginia, was quartered at the halfway house, not 10 miles from where we sat. And I heard him say that at first light, he meant to strike, to capture Lafayette, to end in one bold stroke the Patriots' hold upon Virginia. I knew what it meant. Everyone in Virginia knew what Lafayette meant to the cause. He had come from France to fight for our liberty, a nobleman, barely 23 years old, risking his life and his fortune for a country not his own. If Cornwallis took him, I did not need to be a general to understand. The war in Virginia would be over, and with it, perhaps the war entire. I went to my mother. I told her what I had heard. I told her what I meant to do. She said no. Of course, she said no. I was 16. It was the middle of the night. If the British discovered what I had done, they would hang me as a spy, and her with me likely, and burn this house to the ground. She begged me to sit down, to be sensible, to leave the war to men. But I could not sit down, not knowing what I knew. The plantation has an underground passage, a tunnel built by my grandfather, leading from beneath the house down to the dock on the Appomattox. I do not know why he built it. Perhaps he feared pirates in his day, or perhaps he simply had the inclination. Whatever the reason, it served me well that night. I took the tunnel in the dark, feeling my way along the earthen walls until I reached the dock. The river was black as pitch. I took the canoe and paddled as quietly as I dared. Every stroke of the oar a risk, for sound carries upon water, and there were British sentries upon the shore. I reached the far bank without discovery. There I borrowed a horse from a neighbor, a sturdy creature named Raven, whom I had ridden before. I mounted and rode hard through the darkness toward the halfway house. The road was treacherous in the black of night. Branches struck me in the face. I rode through swamps where the mud sucked at Raven's hooves. I was frightened. God knows I was frightened. But I rode on. When I reached the halfway house, the guards would not admit me at first. "A girl," they said, "a silly girl, come in the middle of the night with some tale." I would not be turned away. I shouted until someone came, until Lafayette himself came to the door. He is not as tall as I imagined, but his eyes are very quick. I told him everything: Cornwallis's plan, the number of men, the direction of the attack. He listened. He thanked me. And before the sun had risen, he had moved his forces from that place. I rode back the way I had come, the same dark road, the same swamps, the same borrowed horse. I reached the tunnel before dawn and slipped back into the house before anyone knew I had been gone. The British officers slept on, undisturbed. I have told no one but my mother. Not yet. Perhaps I never shall tell the whole of it, not in my own lifetime. Women do not ride to warn generals. Women do not win wars. That is what they say, is it not? But I rode last night, and Lafayette is free. And Cornwallis does not know why his plan has failed. They say Lafayette will lead Cornwallis on a chase through Virginia, a game of cat and mouse, as one might say, until the French fleet arrives and traps him. They say there will be a great battle somewhere upon the coast. They say it will end the war. I do not know if any of that shall come to pass. I am only a girl from City Point, but I know this. Last night, I did what I could. I did what I had to do, and I would do it again. Now, if you will excuse me, I must clear the breakfast table before our guests wake. There is much to do, and the war is not yet won.
The Virginia General Assembly in 2019 declared December 5th Susanna Bowling Day. So thank you, Susanna. Another round of applause for our wonderful actors here. Is Lee here? Yeah, Lee is just going to give you a few more words about upcoming attractions. And thank you so much for being here tonight. It's just been such a pleasure to bring some of these voices to life.
I would like to thank both Chris and Kristen for organizing this, and all of the presenters. You were just mesmerizing. I was just so amazed to learn about stories I had known nothing about. Thank you so much for bringing this to us. Now, this is one of many events that the town of Vienna and Historic Vienna and other organizations are bringing to you as part of our 250th celebrations. It is a joint venture between the town of Vienna and Historic Vienna, and is charged with one mission: to organize Vienna's commemoration of our nation's 250th birthday. Already, we've put on a number of events, starting with bringing the mobile museum from the whole state of Virginia to Vienna. It was the second location in Northern Virginia, and that was in July last year. We're hoping to bring it back again through the Rotary at Viva Vienna. So we're working hard. We also did a wonderful roundtable discussion, Vienna at 1775, which is part of our new exhibit at Historic Vienna, and you can hear the recording of that panelist talking about what it was like to be in Vienna at that time. And we also have had a number of talks. We had early screening of the Ken Burns American Revolution program, and then we had talks where we discussed it. So that was exciting. And on the 4th of January, we rang in the new year with the love sign. And we had, just last week, we had Deeply Rooted in the Land, a presentation by Kristen Moon about Black land ownership in Vienna. And I passed out a little sheet which has a number of the events that are coming up in March. You've got the community band, who on March 22nd is going to have their spring concert featuring a new overture in honor of Louise Archer, the Archer Overture, and that will be at Oakton High School at 3 p.m. And on March 29th, it's the first of several series book tours of various authors. We're going to start with Cassandra Good, and then we'll have Derek Baxter on May 31st and Gail Jessup White on June 20th, and more as the fall proceeds. On before that, for our Walk on the Hill, we're going to have patriotic music and bows and plantings, so it'll be really fun to be at Walk on the Hill this year, celebrating a patriotic theme. And then on May 17th, we are celebrating Charles Broadwater Day at the Broadwater grave site opposite the water tower on Tapawingo in Frederick. And that should be a really wonderful event. And then on June 14th, we're going to celebrate Flag Day with a Flag Day celebration and ice cream social. And that is going to be supported by the Flag Association that's going to have all the flags of the United States and around, and it'll be just amazing, with children's activities, with George Washington and Martha Washington reenactors coming, and ice cream that kids can turn and eat. So please join us for these events. We will have additional events on the Historic Vienna websites on the bottom of this and on your program, where to get the latest of all the new events as we announce them. And I'd like to thank one more time everybody who made this wonderful event happen. It was truly amazing.